What the Body Remembers. A Hood Eloquence original story. Chapter 1. The Weight of Starting Over. The Zürich Hauptbahnhof was nothing like Hartsfield-Jackson. There were no gospel music ringtones bouncing off marble floors, no aunties with 3 carry-ons squeezed into one rolling suitcase, no cousins yelling across the terminal like the whole world was their living room. The Swiss moved with a kind of quiet intention that Ashley Bennett had never witnessed in her 23 years of being alive, and she had grown up watching her mother navigate the Atlanta airport like a general commanding troops, reading the departure boards with one eye and managing 3 children with the other, never losing her footing, never losing her cool, never once looking like she was doing anything other than exactly what she intended. Ashley was not her mother. She stood at the bottom of the main hall escalator and let people flow around her like a stream parting at a stone. Her single large suitcase was between her knees. Her carry-on was strapped across her chest, the strap damp from the 11-hour flight, the clasp digging a familiar groove into her collarbone. Everything else she owned: her books, her childhood journals, the ceramic mug her best friend Camille had painted for her senior year with tiny gold stars, and the words "you already know" written in her careful handwriting, was in a shipping container somewhere over the Atlantic. She had $500 left after the deposit on her studio apartment in Ossersheil, a neighborhood she had chosen precisely because the internet said it was where artists and students lived, where nobody wore blazers to get coffee, where people left bicycles unlocked against doorways and trusted the world not to take them. She breathed in. The air smelled different here. Clean in a way that had nothing to do with cleaner, nothing to do with product or effort. It smelled like altitude and stone and a city that had been here long enough to stop trying to prove anything. Like the air itself had made a decision and was simply living by it. Ashley pulled out her phone and opened the email she had read 16 times on the plane, first in Atlanta while they were still boarding, then over the ocean as the cabin went dark and everyone around her fell into the slack-jawed sleep of the well-medicated traveler. She had read it the way you return to a thing you are not yet sure is real. Dear Ms. Bennett, we are pleased to confirm your position as a certified sexual wellness practitioner intern with Core Solidaries, beginning Monday, October 4th. Your training supervisor will be Dr. Marenvoss. Please report to the offices at Langstrasse 88 at 9 a.m. Your assigned client schedule will begin in your second week following orientation and certification review. We look forward to having you with us. She closed the email, opened it, closed it again. The closing and opening was not uncertainty, she was certain. She had been certain since she filled out the application at her kitchen table at midnight while Darius slept in the next room and the city outside was quiet enough that she could hear her own breathing. She was certain the way you are certain about a thing you are choosing not because it is safe, but because it is yours. She had spent 2.5 years studying human sexuality at Spelman. 2.5 years of coursework and practicum hours and thesis drafts that her advisor called some of the most rigorously empathetic work she had reviewed in a decade, and her advisor was not a woman who gave compliments like spare change. She had spent those same 2.5 years in a relationship with a man named Darius who told her, consistently and in many different registers, that what she was studying was shameful. That her interest in the science of intimacy was a reflection of something broken in her. That no decent man would want a woman who spent her days reading about other people's desires, that it would poison how she saw things, that she was building herself into someone unlovable without knowing it. She had believed him for longer than she cared to admit. Not all of it, not all at once, but enough. The slow accumulation of a drip that sounds small until the day you notice the floor is wet. She had started dressing differently, hedging her language in professional settings, apologizing for her research in social situations, front-loading disclaimers before she even finished explaining what she studied. She had watched herself shrink and told herself it was growth. And then she had found the bank statements. Hers, because he'd had her card, had been using it for months with an ease that suggested he had long since stopped thinking of it as a thing requiring permission. $3,000. $4,200. A hotel in Miami she had never been to. A restaurant in Midtown on a Tuesday night she had spent alone. And she understood then, with the clarity of cold water, that the person who had something broken in them had never been her. She had sat with those statements at the kitchen table for 2 hours. She had not cried. She had felt something else, not anger, not yet, but a kind of tremendous stillness, the silence after a sound you have been hearing for so long you stopped noticing it, and now it has stopped. She had opened her laptop. She had finished the Core Solidaries application that had been sitting in her drafts for 3 weeks, because Darius had suggested, carefully, that it seemed extreme. She submitted it at 2:17 a.m. She had her acceptance by the end of the month. Ashley picked up her suitcase now and walked toward the exit, past a family reuniting near the doors, a child launching herself at a man who caught her like he'd been waiting his whole life for exactly that wait. Ashley watched them for a moment without meaning to. There was something in it she needed to carry with her. The idea that you could be caught. That someone could be ready for you. Switzerland was her reset button. Core solidaries was her purpose, reclaimed from the version of herself who had almost let someone else define it. And whatever came next, whoever came next, she would meet with open eyes. She had decided that on the plain somewhere over Greenland, watching the ice below in the moonlight, and she had meant it in a way she intended to hold herself to. She stepped through the automatic doors and the October air hit her face like a slow, clean exhale. Okay, she said quietly, to no one, to herself, to the city that was already moving around her without knowing her name. I see you. Dr. Maren Voss was a compact Swiss-German woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked locks worn loose to her shoulders and a directness that Ashley immediately trusted, not because it was warm, though it was, but because it was honest in the particular way of a person who had learned long ago that honesty was the only real kindness. On the first day of orientation, she sat the 4 new interns around a long oak table in the conference room on the second floor of Langstrasse 88 and placed a single folder in front of each of them. Ashley, a quiet Finnish man named Elias with careful eyes and a tendency to take notes in 2 colors, and 2 women from Lyon named Chloe and Margot who seemed to already know each other in the way of people who have survived something together. What we do here, Dr. Voss began, in English accented with precise Swiss consonants, the kind of accent that gave every word an exact edge, is not what most people imagine when they hear the word. We are not therapists, though we work alongside them. We are not romantic partners. We are not escorts. We are practitioners of a very specific kind of structured human connection that many of our clients have never been able to access in conventional ways, because the conventional ways have failed them, or because the conventional ways were never designed with their bodies and minds in mind. She let that land. She was, Ashley noticed, extremely good at letting things land, at releasing a sentence into the room and waiting while it found everyone. Our clients come to us because the body is where they are stuck. Because intimacy, real intimacy, not the performance of it, requires a kind of safety they have not been able to build with partners in the world. Some of them have physical limitations that make conventional sexual experience difficult or painful. Some have neurological differences that make social connection feel like a foreign language they cannot stop being graded on. Some have simply never been taught what it means to be in a body with another person without shame, without apology, without the feeling that they are somehow doing it wrong. She looked at each of them in turn, and when her eyes reached Ashley, they stayed for a half-second longer, the way a teacher's eyes rest on the student they have already assessed. Your job is not to fix them. Your job is to meet them exactly where they are. Ashley wrote that down. Exactly where they are. She underlined it twice, then sat back and looked at those 4 words and thought about all the places she herself had not been met. All the times she had adjusted her position to make herself easier to reach rather than asking to be reached on her own terms. She thought, I am going to be very good at this job. She thought, and I am going to be good at it because I know what it costs to be left exactly where you are. The apartment in Ossersheim was small and close and warm in the way of a place that has been inhabited by people who needed warmth and passed it into the walls. A kitchen that was really a wall with appliances, 2-burner stove, a refrigerator she could reach across with one arm, a wooden cutting board that fit exactly over the sink and doubled as counter space. A bathroom the size of a generous closet with a shower that offered 2 temperatures, scalding and cold. One deep window overlooking a courtyard where a red bicycle had been locked to the drainpipe at some earlier point by someone who had left it there and not come back. Ashley loved it immediately. She unpacked what she had brought in her suitcase, her good shea butter, and the smaller travel tin for daily use, her grandmother's Bible she did not read but could not leave behind, the weight of it necessary in a way she had stopped questioning. A framed photo of herself and Camille at graduation, both of them in caps and gowns and enormous grins, Camille's arm thrown around Ashley's neck with the easy ownership of a person who had known you before you knew yourself. Both of them beaming. Both of them having absolutely no idea what was coming. She set the photo on the windowsill where the light would reach it in the morning, angled toward the courtyard, and then sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firmer than she preferred. The duvet was thick and white and smelled faintly of something lavender adjacent. Outside, the city moved in its particular Swiss register, quieter than Atlanta, less aggressive than New York, a city that seemed to conduct itself at a volume that suggested it had nothing to prove. She was 23 years old. She was 5,000 miles from the apartment she had shared with a man who had drained her checking account and her self-worth in roughly equal measure over 31 months, a man she had loved in the specific way you love the first person who makes you feel chosen. Before you understand that being chosen by the wrong person is its own kind of loss. She was carrying $34,000 in student debt and the memory of having to borrow money from her mother to make the flight, her mother who had not said "I told you so" but whose silence on the phone had its own specific grammar. She was also, for the first time in years, exactly where she had chosen to be. Not where someone else's vision of her had landed her. Not where staying felt easier than leaving. Exactly, specifically, deliberately here. She lay back on the bed, still made, still in her coat, boots still on, carry-on strap still across her chest, and stared at the ceiling. It had a small water stain in the far corner shaped roughly like a crescent. She decided to think of it as the moon. "Okay, Ashley," she whispered to the moon-shaped stain. "Let's try this again." Chapter 2, First Look. She met him on a Wednesday. Dr. Voss had given her the file the Friday before, a single page, which was all course solidaries ever provided before a first session, a policy that Ashley had initially found frustrating and had come to understand as deliberate mercy. Name, age, background context, reason for referral. The philosophy was stated plainly in the orientation materials. Reading too much about a person before you met them was a form of deciding. You arrived in the room not with openness, but with a thesis, and the session became about confirming what you already thought rather than discovering what was actually there. Reading it more than once was discouraged. The point, Dr. Voss had said, was presence, not preparation. You cannot truly meet someone you have already decided you understand. Ashley had read the file once, on Friday evening, sitting at her kitchen table with the two-burner stove making the particular ticking sound it made when the heat was off and the metal was cooling. She had made herself a meal, rice and lentils, and the particular combination of spices she had learned from watching her grandmother, a woman who cooked with the confidence of someone who had never once consulted a recipe and never intended to. She ate slowly and read the single page slowly, and then folded it and set it aside. His name was André Nkurunziza, 31 years old. Swiss-born, parents from Burundi who had arrived in Geneva in the 90s and made a life there with the tenacity of people who understand that a life is something you build rather than something that happens to you. Referred by his occupational therapist following 2 years of social skills work conducted in conjunction with ongoing therapy. Autistic. No prior experience with structured intimacy practice. Goal: learn to relax in the physical presence of a woman. Long-term aspiration: partnership. That last line had stayed with her all weekend. Long-term aspiration: partnership. She had seen that word in files before: partnership, relationship, connection, but never quite like that. Never phrased with that particular plainness, that absence of qualifier or hedge. Most clients' goals were functional, specific, calibrated to what the session could actually deliver: reduce anxiety around touch, improve comfort with physical proximity, understand and practice consent language. His goal felt like something else. Like a man who had looked at what he wanted and written it down without embarrassment, without the apologetic parenthetical that most people attach to desire, the reflexive small making of wanting something real. She thought about that off and on through Saturday and Sunday. She went to the market on Saturday morning and bought vegetables and a piece of fish and something small and Swiss and chocolate that she ate on the walk home. She read for most of Sunday, sitting in the deep window with her back against the wall and her feet on the sill, the red bicycle in the courtyard below standing in its particular stillness. She thought about André Nkurunziza's file and the word partnership and the particular quality of a want that wasn't ashamed of itself. She was in the small consultation room on the second floor of the Langstrasse offices when he arrived for the first session. It was a room she had already come to know: 2 low chairs upholstered in a warm beige, a small table between them with nothing on it but a glass of water she had placed there for him, a window that faced the street and let in a thin October light. She had arranged herself in her chair at 2:50 for a 3 o'clock appointment, which she recognized as a form of nerves she was not going to indulge. She heard him before she saw him. Careful footsteps in the corridor, not slow, not tentative, but considered, the footsteps of a person who was aware of the weight and placement of their own body. A pause outside the door that lasted several seconds, longer than the pause of someone gathering themselves before knocking and shorter than the pause of someone deciding whether to leave. Then the knock, 2 measured raps. "Come in." He was tall. That was the first thing, unexpectedly tall, the kind of tall that announced itself not through posture, but through the simple fact of proportion, the way a room became smaller around him without him having done anything to cause it. He wore a charcoal sweater that had clearly been chosen carefully, not expensive but clean, well-fitted, the kind of garment a person puts on when they are trying to make a good impression without appearing to try. Dark trousers with a precise crease. Shoes that were clean in the particular way of shoes that had been cleaned that morning, recently buffed, still carrying the effort. His face was, she found herself searching for the word and rejecting several before landing on composed, which was not quite right but was the closest she could come. Not composed in the way of someone suppressing feeling, there was nothing suppressed about him. More like the face of someone who processed the world slowly and thoroughly and had learned to trust their own pace, who took in information and considered it before responding and had no apology for the considering. His eyes, when they found hers, were very dark and very still. Not guarded, open. Present in a way that was slightly startling, the way silence in a loud city is slightly startling, the way you notice the absence of something you had stopped registering. He stopped just inside the door and did not look around the room the way most new clients did, cataloging exits, finding the corners, assessing what kind of space this was. He looked at her. Steadily, openly, with the concentrated attention of a child who has found something genuinely interesting and is not yet aware that staring is considered rude. She felt oddly seen. "Hello," he said. His voice was low and careful, each word placed with the same precision as his footsteps. English with a Swiss-French lilt underneath it and something else beneath that, something that might have been the sound of parents who carried another language in their mouths even when they were speaking this one. "Hello," she said. "I'm Ashley. Please come in and sit wherever feels comfortable." He considered the two chairs with the same thoroughness. He gave everything, then sat in the one closest to the wall. She noticed that his jacket, a dark wool thing he had not taken off, was still buttoned, that his hands, when he set them on the arms of the chair, were very still. "I want to let you know how today works," she said, keeping her voice easy, the particular register she had practiced in training, warm without being performative, clear without being clinical. "This first session is just us talking, getting to know each other a little. There's nothing required of you today except being here." He nodded once. Then, after a pause that was long enough to suggest he had been listening to the whole sentence rather than just waiting for it to end, "I prepared something to say. In case I couldn't find the words when I got here." She blinked. "That's thoughtful. It usually helps me to write things first, to practice them." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, which he still had not taken off, and produced a small folded piece of paper. He looked at it briefly, then back at her. "May I? Please?" He unfolded it carefully, the folds releasing with the sound of something that had been opened and refolded and opened again. He held it with both hands and read in the same low, unhurried voice he used for everything. "I am not good at this. I mean, I am not good at being with women in the way that seems to come naturally to other men. I notice things that I am told I should not say. I do not always know when to speak and when to be quiet. I do not always know when something I have said has landed wrong until it is too late to repair it, and by then the other person has usually already decided something about me. Women have told me that I am too much and also too little, and I have never understood how to be the right amount, or whether the right amount is something that can be learned or something you are either born with or not. I hope it can be learned. That is why I am here. I want to learn what it feels like to be in a room with a woman and not feel like I am failing a test I was never given the rules to." He folded the paper with the same care he had unfolded it, replaced it in his pocket, and looked at her. Ashley sat very still for a moment. The thin October light came through the window and lay across the table between them. The glass of water she had placed for him caught a piece of it and held it. Then she said, "André, can I tell you something?" He looked at her directly. "Yes. What you just read to me, that was one of the most honest things anyone has ever said in this room. And I mean that without qualification. Not for someone with your particular challenges, not given what I know about your background. Just as a piece of human honesty. That was remarkable." He considered this. She could see him considering it, the way she was learning to read his processing, not hesitation, not deflection, just thorough receipt. "I wasn't sure it was appropriate." It was exactly appropriate. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not yet. The muscles around his eyes changed, softened slightly, the way the surface of water changes when something below it moves. He set his hands on his knees. For the first time since he'd walked in, his shoulders dropped slightly from his ears. "Okay," he said. And Ashley thought, this one is going to matter. She did not know yet what she meant by that or what it would cost her to find out. She filed the thought in the place she kept things she was not ready to examine and moved on, the way you move past a window in a house that isn't yours, catching something in the corner of your vision and keeping walking, knowing you noticed. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Touch. Session 2 was on a Monday, and he arrived at 2:58, 2 minutes early, which she registered because she had arrived at 2:50 for the same reason, and it meant something about both of them. Core Solidaries had a suite of private rooms on the upper floors of the building, each designed according to the same philosophy as the consultation spaces on the floor below, neutral, warm, unhurried. The room she and André had been assigned was on the third floor, facing the courtyard. Two wide chairs positioned at a slight angle to each other rather than directly across, a detail that had been explained to Ashley in orientation as intentional, the difference between a confrontation and a conversation. A daybed along the far wall, firm and covered in warm linen the color of unbleached cotton. Ambient lighting adjustable by a dimmer near the door. A small table with water and whatever the practitioner brought for the session. No clock visible from the daybed. No clock visible from the chairs. Time was not the structure of this room. Attention was. Ashley had arrived early and stood at the window for a few minutes, watching the courtyard below. The red bicycle was there, it was always there, her fixed point, the thing she had come to use as a kind of anchor, the way sailors use stars. She had spent the weekend rereading her orientation notes and thinking, intermittently and without great discipline, about André. Not inappropriately, or rather, not yet inappropriately. Just in the way a new thing presents itself to the mind before you have fully understood it, the way a piece of music you have only heard once keeps returning in fragments. He knocked and she opened the door. Different sweater today, dark green, the same careful fit. Same shoes. He had a small paper bag in one hand that he held slightly away from his body, like an offering he was not yet sure would be received. I brought something, he said, and then immediately looked uncertain in the specific way of someone who has done a thing they thought was right and is now questioning the data. Is that acceptable? To bring something? Of course. What is it? He held out the bag. Coffee. From the place 2 streets over, the one on the corner with the green awning. I wasn't sure how you take it, so I brought the options separately. He produced 3 small sealed cups from the bag with the precise organization of someone who had considered this at length and planned accordingly. He lined them up on the table. Milk. Sugar. And black. Ashley looked at the 3 little cups arranged in his palm, a whole research project, a small act of care made systematic, and felt something move in her chest that she did not immediately name. Black, she said. Thank you, André. He looked briefly, quietly pleased. The pleasure was small and real and not performed for her benefit. It was the pleasure of a person who had expected a thing to go wrong and found that it had not. They sat across from each other, and she walked him through what the coming weeks would look like, the structure of each session, the consent protocols, the way they would build gradually from the least to the more, from the simpler to the more complex, always at his pace, always with his explicit agreement at every stage. He listened the way she was already learning. He listened to everything, completely, without interrupting, without the performative nods people deploy to signal comprehension when they are actually elsewhere. When she finished, he said, "Can I ask a question?" "Always." "What do you get from this?" "From doing this work." He held her gaze. "I've been thinking about that since last week. What it costs a person. He paused. "I want to understand what this is for you. Not just what it is officially. What it actually is." She had been asked variations of this question before, in training and in the early practice sessions, and she had a practitioner answer, about professional fulfillment, about the satisfaction of useful work, about the importance of this particular kind of care in the ecosystem of human support. She had given that answer many times. She looked at André now, at his still eyes and his genuine attention, and decided to give him the other answer instead. "I get to be useful in a way that most people are afraid to even name," she said. "I get to help people understand that they deserve to feel comfortable in their own skin, that their bodies are not problems to be managed, that wanting to be touched carefully and being touched carefully is a legitimate human need and not a weakness." And she paused, organizing something she had not said out loud before. "I'm rebuilding something in myself, I think. The belief that intimacy doesn't have to mean losing yourself. That you can be close to someone and still be entirely who you are. I lost that for a while. This work helps me find it back." He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet fully, not as a gap waiting to be filled. "Then, someone took that from you." It was not a question. He had said it the way you state something you have observed, with the same flatness he used for all factual things. "Yes," she said. He nodded, slowly. "Me too. But differently." He looked at his hands briefly. "Nobody took it. I think I was born without a clear map to it. Like everyone else had a manual for this and mine was in a language I couldn't read." She did not push. Neither did he. They sat in that shared acknowledgement for a moment, 2 people carrying different shapes of the same kind of loss, holding them between them at a careful distance, neither reaching across. Then she said, "Are you ready to begin?" "Yes." "Okay." She shifted in her chair, angling herself slightly toward him. "We're going to start very simply today. I'm going to ask you to practice being aware of your own hands. Just your hands, nothing else. Can you set them on your knees, palms facing up?" He did. His hands were large and steady, the fingers slightly spread, and she could see from across the table the small scar along the outside of his right palm, silvery and old, healed so completely it looked less like a wound and more like a characteristic. "Good. Now, are you comfortable if I sit beside you rather than across? I want you to get used to proximity before we add anything else." A pause. Not hesitation, consideration. "Yes." She rose and moved to the daybed, sitting at one end and leaving the length of it between them. He stood from his chair with the same deliberateness he brought to everything and came to sit at the other end, mirroring her posture without being asked, back straight, hands resting on his knees, palms up. "I'm going to tell you something about how I experience touch," she said. "And then I want you to tell me something too. This is how we learn each other. Not guessing, not assuming, asking and answering. That's the whole method." Okay. I notice touch most in my hands. When someone holds my hand, not grips it, holds it, the way you hold something fragile, I feel it everywhere. In my chest, behind my eyes. It sounds strange. It doesn't sound strange, he said immediately, with a certainty that suggested he had not needed to think about this. Then, quieter, as though he was telling her something he had not intended to tell her, I feel most things in my chest anyway. Before I can name them. Before I know what they are. Everything arrives there first. Yes, she said softly. Exactly like that. She extended her right hand, palm up, toward the center of the space between them on the daybed. She did not reach across the distance. She placed it in the middle, an invitation that required him to cross more than half the gap. This is the invitation, she said. You don't have to take it. But if you want to, you can. He looked at her hand for a long moment. She could see him deciding, not nervously, she realized. Not bracing. He was being thorough. He was checking something internally, consulting something, and the consulting took the time it took, and he did not apologize for it. He was not afraid. He was precise. Then he placed his right hand in hers. His palm was warm. Warmer than she had expected, not feverish, just warm in the way of a person who carries heat naturally, who gives it off without thinking. He did not squeeze, did not grip, did not do anything with his hand except place it in hers and leave it there. Present. Like he had nowhere else to be and no other intention. She let her fingers close lightly around the outside of his hand. Not claiming, just meeting. How does that feel? She asked, keeping her voice the neutral professional instrument it was supposed to be. A long pause. His eyes were on their hands. Like I stopped holding my breath. She looked at him then. He was still looking at their hands, studying them the way he studied everything, with the complete, unself-conscious attention of someone for whom looking was a form of thinking. And Ashley was aware, with the part of herself she was training to manage carefully, that she had just said the same thing internally. Not as a clinical observation. As a fact about herself. Me too, she said. And meant it more than she should have. Session 3 fell on a Thursday, and she had been guiding him through a sustained touch exercise for nearly 40 minutes, the kind of practice that built body awareness incrementally, that taught the nervous system to receive sensation as information rather than threat. She had designed the session carefully. She had a plan. He arrived and sat across from her on the daybed, and she began the exercise, his right hand on her forearm, the inside of it, bare from elbow to wrist. The simplest geography. The least ambiguous landscape. Start at the wrist, she said. And move as slowly as you possibly can toward the inside of my elbow. No stopping. No pressure. Just barely there. Like you're not sure the surface is real. He did. She had taught this exercise 20 times in training, and she had practiced it, and she had discussed it academically in 4 different contexts, and she had a clear and comprehensive understanding of what it was designed to do and how it functioned. None of that had prepared her for this. For the single careful line of his fingertip tracing the pale interior of her arm at the pace of something growing, something that had decided where it was going and was not going to be rushed. It moved through her like a vibration rather than a touch, like a frequency finding its resonance. She breathed out slowly through her nose. Keep going, she said. Softer than she intended. He reached the inside of her elbow and stopped, lifting his finger barely clear of her skin. He looked at her face with that total attention. Again, he asked. Yes, but don't follow the same line. Find a different one. He began again. Slightly different path, not random, considered. The same impossible patience. And she thought, this man has no idea what he is doing to me. This is a clinical exercise. This is the most basic level of structured touch practice in the entire curriculum. And she thought, his hands are extraordinary. Not in the way of practiced hands, not in the way of someone who has learned technique. In the way of someone who pays attention. She thought, stop it, Ashley. She refocused. What do you notice? She asked, returning to the session voice. He considered before answering. Your skin changes, he said. Here, his finger rested, barely a breath of pressure, at a point where a small warmth had risen near the center of her forearm. Temperature. It's warmer here than it was before I started. That's the body responding to sustained attention, she said. That's the thing we're building toward, learning to recognize that response in another person. To read what you're creating. To know what you're doing. I want to know what I'm doing, he said. Quietly. As though he were saying something much larger than the sentence contained. She met his eyes. He held her gaze without effort, without the slight flinch she had come to expect from people who were not used to being looked back at. I can tell, she said. Chapter 4. The Rules of the Room. By the 4th session they had a rhythm. She had started to think of it as a rhythm in the musical sense, not just regularity, but something with texture and movement, something that had its own internal logic that you could feel when you were inside it. He arrived slightly early. She arrived before that. He always brought something small, the coffee that first time, a little paper bag of the spiced Swiss cookies she had mentioned in passing during a moment that she had not imagined he was cataloging. Once, memorably, a single paperback he had found at a second-hand shop near his apartment in Whippingen, an English translation of a Congolese novel by an author she had been meaning to find since a professor had mentioned the name in her second year. He had handed it to her without ceremony, without explanation, without any accompanying statement about what it meant or what he had been thinking. He placed it on the table in front of her and sat down and looked at her the way he always looked at her. She had understood from the manner of it that explaining would have been too much. That the book was already the explanation. She read 60 pages that night. It was extraordinary, rich, and precise, and written with the kind of intelligence that trusted its reader absolutely. She had thought about him while reading it, and then told herself that was incidental. In the room, session by session, they built. The way you build anything real, not by skipping layers, not by rushing toward the part you have decided in advance is the point, but by understanding each element before adding the next. She taught him about the difference between touch that asks and touch that tells, about how those two things feel different to the person receiving them even when the physical gesture is almost identical. She taught him about breath as signal, how holding breath means bracing, how the release of it means something has been received, how a change in rhythm means a change in the interior weather. She was beginning to understand, a spectacular student. Not in the sense of someone who follows instructions well, but in the original sense of the word, one who looks. He watched. He noticed. He forgot nothing. And somewhere around the 4th session, he began to take over. It happened the way a tide turns, not in one moment you can point to, but in a gradual and inevitable shift in direction. She would set the parameters of an exercise, establish the boundaries of what they were doing, offer herself as the guide. And he would begin. And then, somewhere in the middle of what was supposed to be a structured practice, he would do something she had not told him to do. Something that was not in the curriculum. Something that was better than what was in the curriculum because it was responsive rather than prescriptive, because he was responding to her specifically, to this body and this person, rather than to the concept of a body. The 4th session she was showing him the space at the base of the neck, the place where the shoulder meets the throat, that particular junction the body uses as a storage facility for things the mind doesn't know how to process. Most people rush past this, she explained, touching her own collarbone lightly to indicate. But this is where a lot of people hold what they can't say out loud. The body stores what the mind doesn't know how to handle. Learning to recognize this place in another person, to feel the tension there, is one of the most important things you can know. May I? He asked. Yes. His hand came to her shoulder, large and warm and positioned with the care of someone who has thought about where to place a thing before placing it, and then it moved. Not to the collarbone. Not where she had been pointing. To the back of her neck, the very base of it, where the hairline ended and the muscles of the upper spine gathered themselves. He curved his fingers lightly into that warm space, the pads of them barely making contact, and simply rested there. Everything in her went still. Not frozen, stilled, the way a room stills when you turn off a noise you had long since stopped hearing. André, she said, and her voice was different than she intended it to be. That's not where I know, he said. His voice was low and completely unhurried. He had not moved his hand. But this is where you're holding it. She closed her eyes. He was right. She had been carrying something there for days, the accumulated and specific weight of starting over, of the debt that arrived as a number in her mind every morning before anything else, of the apartment that still didn't feel like home, of the 3 a.m. wake-ups when the city was quiet enough for the old voice to find her, Darius's voice telling her who she was allowed to want and what she was allowed to be. She had been carrying it in the back of her neck without knowing she was carrying it, the way you carry things in the body before the mind has consented to acknowledge them. She felt his hand there like a conversation. Like a voice saying, I see where you put things. I see the exact location of what you're carrying. And I'm not going to pretend I don't. André, she said again, softer. I'll stop if you want me to. A pause. Long enough that she was aware of it as a pause, as a decision being made. Don't stop, she said. He stayed there, just there, nothing more than that warmth at the base of her skull, the full quiet presence of his hand for a long time. She breathed. The tension released in slow layers, the way old ice thaws, not all at once but from the surface inward, gradually, the cold becoming less certain of itself. She felt the muscles of her neck and upper back releasing things they had been holding since before she could remember holding them. When she opened her eyes, he was watching her. That particular expression she was learning to read, the one that was not quite a smile and was not quite anything else she had a name for. The expression of a person processing something he finds deeply significant and treating that significance with the seriousness it deserves. How did you know? She asked. I watch you, he said. Simply, as though it were a plain and unremarkable fact. The way you carry yourself when you come in changes session to session. Today you came in like something heavy was on you. The way your head sat slightly forward. The way you held the back of your jaw. He paused. I noticed those things. I have always noticed those things about people. I usually don't say so because I've learned that saying so makes people feel observed in a way that makes them uncomfortable. But you asked. She sat with that. She was aware that she should say something now about the professional line, about where the sessions lived and what they were for and the importance of maintaining the clarity of that structure. She was aware that Dr. Voss would have wanted her to say it. She was aware that she had a clipboard with a session plan on it that did not include any of what had just happened. Instead, she said, "What else do you notice?" And something in his face opened. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way a door unlocks when the right key enters, a small release of resistance that changes what is possible. "Everything," he said. She called Camille that night at 9, which was 3 p.m. in Atlanta, and Camille picked up on the first ring. First ring pickup meant she had been waiting. Waiting meant Ashley had sent a text earlier that said something vague, and Camille had correctly read it as code for something is happening, and I'm not sure how to say it yet. "Talk," Camille said, by way of greeting. "I might be in trouble." "What kind?" Camille's voice was already in the register she used when she was paying complete attention, not the animated social voice, but the still one, the one she deployed when things were real. The kind I didn't see coming. The kind I was supposed to have been trained specifically not to be in. A pause. "Is he fine?" Ashley looked at the ceiling of her apartment. The moon stain was there in its corner. The red bicycle was below in the dark courtyard. I genuinely don't know how to describe him. He doesn't operate by the rules I'm used to. He doesn't try to fill silences or manage impressions. He brought me coffee and planned the options in advance in case I had a preference. He brought me a book that I had mentioned exactly once in a conversation he gave no indication of particularly attending to. He found it. At a second-hand shop. He didn't say anything about it. He just put it down in front of me. "A book," Camille said. "A Congolese novel that I mentioned once in passing because I said I'd been trying to read more African literature." "He found it, Camille." He went and found it. Another pause. Longer. Camille thinking pause, the silence she used when she was assembling something carefully. "Ashley. I know. He's your client." "I know, Camille. This is the specific thing that they trained you about. This exact thing. I know. I know it. I know the terminology for it. I know the section of the handbook. I know the clinical language for what this is. I'm not doing anything wrong. Every session is completely inside protocol. She exhaled slowly. "I'm telling you what I notice. That's all. I need someone to tell." A quiet moment. Then Camille, carefully, "What does he notice?" Ashley thought about his hand at the base of her neck. The precision of it. The certainty that was not arrogance, not presumption, just an accurate reading of something real. "Everything," she said. "He notices everything. And he doesn't pretend otherwise." "Lord," Camille said softly. "Yeah," Ashley said. "I know." Chapter 5, New Heights. Session 6 was the first one where she lost track of time completely, not the usual slight drift, the way 40 minutes could feel like 30 when the session was going well, but a genuine dissolution of the clock. So that when she finally registered the quality of the light changing in the courtyard, she realized they were nearly 20 minutes over and neither of them had noticed. She had been working with him through a consent and communication exercise, the kind that used explicit language to build a shared vocabulary between two people, to replace assumption with question and answer, to teach the practice of making nothing implicit that could be made explicit. They had been working for 40 minutes and somewhere in the middle of it the exercise had become something else without either of them having made a decision about it. Not abandoned, the structure was still there, the language still careful and deliberate. But the temperature of the room had changed, imperceptibly and then all at once, the way rooms change. She had been showing him how she preferred to be touched at the temples. "Light," she said. "Circular. The kind of slow pressure that isn't going anywhere, that isn't moving towards something else, isn't building to a different touch. Just this. Just here." Most people treat every touch like a preamble to the next touch, like every location on the body is just a waypoint. The temples are a destination. They deserve to be treated like one. He had listened. He had placed the pads of his thumbs at her temples with the care of someone handling something that matters, and he had begun. And somewhere in the first 30 seconds, she had stopped guiding and simply received it, her hands falling to her lap, her instructions finished, his attention complete. His thumbs moved in slow half-circles above her ears. She felt it the way you feel certain music, not in the ears but in the chest, in the bones, the sensation traveling through her along some interior channel that bypassed analysis entirely. She breathed out through her nose, and the breath was longer and slower than the one before it. "Right there," she said, very quietly. That she stopped. She had been about to say, "That's exactly the kind of pressure I mean." The clinical sentence. She stopped because it was not what she meant at all. He did not ask what she'd been about to say. He seemed to already have understood something about the stopping. His thumbs maintained their rhythm without interruption, and she had the sensation of being read in real time, of being responded to by someone who was receiving information she wasn't consciously transmitting. "This is what I mean," she managed after a moment, reaching for the session voice the way you reach for a railing. "When you find the right place, the exact place the body has been asking to have acknowledged, everything else quiets. You can hear it happen. Everything that was competing for space just steps back." "I can feel it," he said. "When I find it." Something changes in the way you breathe. The rhythm changes. It goes from managed to he paused. She could feel from the quality of the pause that he was searching for the right word rather than the approximate one. From managed to real. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her with that complete attention, those still dark eyes that never seemed to need to look away, that didn't flinch from being looked back at, that held their own. They were close. She registered this suddenly, the way you register something that has been true for a while. They were close on the daybed, the proximity that accumulated naturally in these sessions, and that she was supposed to be aware of and apparently had not been. You can see that? She asked. The managed to real. I could see it from the first session, he said. That you were managing something. That there was something underneath the. He made a small gesture with one hand, graceful and imprecise, indicating the professional manner, the careful competence, all of it. Something underneath that was very tired. I didn't say so because I wasn't sure it was appropriate. It was appropriate. I'm learning, he said. What is appropriate with you specifically? It's different from the general rules. She said. I was tired. I still am sometimes. Less here than elsewhere. Something moved through his expression. He brought his hands down from her temples slowly, the way you withdraw from something carefully, with the same attention you brought to the arriving. He set them on his knees. Ashley, he said. The first time he had used her name with that particular weight, not as address but as punctuation. A whole sentence made of one word. André. I need to say something that might be outside the parameters of the session. Her heart moved. She felt it physically, a small shift in her chest, of a reorganization of something. Be careful, she said. About what comes next. I know. A pause. The considering pause. I want you to know that what happens here, he stopped. Searched. Chose. It is not nothing. To me. It is not an exercise. I know that is what it is officially. I know that is what I am supposed to say if someone asks. But it is not true, and he looked at his hands. I have learned here that saying what is true is allowed. The room was very quiet. Outside, the city moved at its Swiss pace, unhurried, indifferent. André, she said carefully. What happens in this room is real. I want to be clear about that. I'm not managing you. I'm not performing a service at a professional remove. What you feel here is real and it matters and you are real to me. You are not a case file to me. She paused. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, he said. But that's not exactly what I meant. I know, she said softly. Tell me more when you find the words. He nodded. Once. The small contained nod. And said nothing else, and it was not a failure, it was a kind of arrival, the acknowledgement that the important thing had been said, and the rest could wait for its proper time. And Ashley, who was supposed to be the one in the room who knew what was happening, sat with the profound awareness that she was not entirely sure of anything anymore except that she wanted very badly to be in this room with this man on every Wednesday and Monday and Thursday until she understood what was growing between them. And possibly after. Chapter 6. What the Body Keeps. Session 8 fell on a Monday, and Ashley had been awake since 4 in the morning. She had tried to sleep and failed at it, which was not unusual. There had been a run of weeks in her life when sleeping felt like a skill she had temporarily lost, when 4 a.m. was simply the hour the body admitted what the mind had been avoiding. She got up and made tea and sat at the small kitchen table with the Congolese novel, which she was nearly finished with and had been rationing the way you ration something you know you cannot replace. She read in the light of the range hood, which was the smallest light in the apartment and the one that felt least like an announcement. She had been honest with herself somewhere around chapter 30 of the novel, when the protagonist made a choice that Ashley understood in her bones, the kind of choice that looks irrational from the outside and is the only sane thing from the inside. She had set the book down and looked at the dark window over the courtyard, at the ghost of the red bicycle below, and she had said to herself, simply and without drama, "You are falling in love with a client." She had known this was possible. It was in the handbook. It was in the training materials. Dr. Voss had addressed it directly in the second week of orientation, sitting at the oak table with that particular quality of calm that suggested she had said this before and would say it again, and had arrived at a version of it that was both honest and kind. Transference, countertransference, the natural intimacy of structured touch practice, the ways that the conditions of the session created emotional heat, and why that heat was not the same thing as romantic feeling even when it was indistinguishable from it. Ashley had read all of this carefully. She had taken notes. She had believed, when she read it, that she understood it the way you believe you understand a warning on a medication you have never taken. She understood it differently now because she was in it. Because the handbook described a feeling that moved in one direction, client toward practitioner, vulnerability seeking safety, the person in need reaching toward the person equipped to provide. That was the thing to be careful of, the thing to name clearly and manage with transparency and clinical detachment. It did not fully describe what she was actually experiencing, which was two-directional and not reducible to need. André was not projecting onto her. He was not looking for a mother figure or a mirror or a safe substitute for the connections he had failed to make. He was looking at her, specifically, with the kind of attention that does not produce projections because it is too busy seeing what is actually there. And she was not managing his attachment. She was being moved. She sat with her cold tea for a long time. She thought about Darius, not with the old pain, which had calcified into something duller and more manageable over the months, but with a kind of clarity she had not previously had access to. Darius had taught her to distrust her own perceptions of her own feelings. He had done this so gradually and thoroughly that she had not noticed the process until she was already unable to trust herself. She was aware that this awareness was relevant. She was aware that loving someone after a period of that kind of recalibration required a kind of patience with yourself, a willingness to move slowly and to check your own readings against reality repeatedly before trusting them. She checked. She checked honestly, in the way she had learned to check honestly since arriving here, in the way the city and this work and this strange new life had taught her to look at things clearly rather than in the shape of what she hoped or feared they were. André was real. What happened between them was real. She was not confusing gratitude for love or intimacy for romance. She had spent enough time in the structured practice of distinguishing those things to know the difference. She set the book down, drank the cold tea, thought about Dr. Voss, about Section 12, about the specific and careful language of the protocol. Then she got up, got dressed, and went to the session. He was already in the room when she arrived. The room that was theirs now, in the way that spaces become theirs when people have occupied them regularly enough, the chairs that had adjusted to their bodies, the particular quality of afternoon light they both knew by this point, the courtyard below that both of them had looked at from the window enough times that it had become a shared reference point. He was standing at the window when she came in, hands in his pockets, looking down. He turned at the sound of the door, immediately, not startled, as though he had been waiting rather than unaware. He looked at her the way he always did, and then he said, "You didn't sleep." "How do you know?" "The way you hold your face when you're tired is different from your normal face. More careful. There's more effort behind the expression, like you're being precise about it rather than just being it." He paused. "You also came in 7 minutes later than usual, and you always arrive before me." She sat down on the daybed. "You're going to make it very difficult for me to pretend with you." "I know." He came and sat beside her, closer than the session usually positioned them, not touching, but the nearness of him was tangible, a warmth that had its own particular quality. "I don't want you to pretend. I've never wanted that. Pretending requires a kind of performance that I find exhausting even when I'm the one expected to perform it, and I have no desire to receive it." "What do you want, André?" She asked it directly, looking at him directly, the way she had decided at the kitchen table at 4 in the morning she would ask it. A long pause. He was turning the question over, the way she had watched him turn things over, thoroughly, without rushing, with the same care he brought to placement of hands on skin. "I want to understand you," he said finally. "Completely. The way I understand things that matter to me, which means slowly and seriously, and without deciding in advance what I'm going to find. I want to know what you were like at 12 years old, and what made you choose this field, and what kind of music you put on when you don't want to feel anything, and what you look like when you're not managing anything at all." He paused. "I want to be the reason you sleep." Something broke open in her chest. Not painfully, that was the thing. Not a breaking that hurt. The way a window breaks open when the room inside has needed air for too long and someone finally reaches the latch. "André," she said, and her voice was entirely hers, with nothing professional left in it. "You know I can't the sessions, the protocol." "I know the rules," he said. "I read the documentation. All of it. Section 12 specifically." A pause. "I'm not asking you to break anything. I'm just telling you what I want, because I have learned in this room that saying what I want is allowed. That I don't have to manage it in silence until it calcifies into something unrecognizable." He looked at her. "I have done that before. I am not doing it again." "No," she said softly. "You don't have to do that. And I wanted you to know. So that when the time comes, if it comes, if the protocol allows, if you decide you want it to come, you would already know. You wouldn't have to wonder." She looked at him for a long time. At this man who had arrived in her consultation room with a folded piece of paper and a complete, careful self held exactly where he could access it. Who had watched her breathe for sessions before he found the right place. Who had read the whole handbook and highlighted Section 12. "I already know," she said. He breathed out slowly. Not relief exactly, something deeper, more cellular. Recognition. The sound of a thing that has been true for a long time being acknowledged out loud. They sat together in the warm quiet of the room, shoulder almost to shoulder, and let the space between knowing and acting on it hold them gently, like something that was patient and had no plans to leave. Later in that session, she put the clipboard down. She had planned an exercise from the curriculum, one she had done before, one she knew worked. She looked at the clipboard and then at him and then at the distance between the exercise and what was actually in the room with her, and she put the clipboard on the table and turned to face him. I want to do something different today. Not the curriculum. I want to teach you something about what I need. Not as a practitioner modeling a technique. As me. Just me, telling you. His eyes went very still. I'm listening. She turned on the daybed so their knees were almost touching, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. She told him about the back of her neck, which he already knew, which they both knew, but she said it anyway as a beginning. She told him about her hands, about the holding that asked rather than claimed, the kind of holding that made her feel like the held thing was valuable. She told him about the base of her spine, not pressing, just present, a hand there that said, I know where you are. I'm not going anywhere. Where else? He asked. Quietly. Attending. She looked at him and decided to trust what she had decided at 4 a.m. She told him everything. The inside of her wrist where the skin was thinnest and the pulse visible, where touch was almost too much and exactly right at the same time. The space behind her knee that she had never told anyone about, a place so rarely touched that sensation there was startling and private and complicated. The line of her jaw, traced from ear to chin slowly, which felt like being read. The curve of her shoulder where the neck met it, which felt like being held even without an embrace. She described these places with the same precision and seriousness she brought to her research, with the same absence of apology, and she watched him listen. He held her hand the way she had described. As though it were something worth being careful with, worth the effort of careful. He held it through the whole of what she said, and she felt the warmth of it behind everything else, a steady ground note. When she finished, he did not try to demonstrate everything. He took his time. He began with her hand and then brought his other to the back of her neck and simply rested it there, his fingers barely curved into that warm space. She settled. She felt herself settle the way a note settles into its key, not a collapse, not a surrender, but an arrival. The sensation of having been slightly out of pitch for a very long time and hearing it resolve. Is this right? He asked. Yes, she said. That's exactly right. Tell me when I miss. And tell me when I find it. I will, she said. And meant both. And later, much later, when she was trying to remember the exact sequence and geography of that session, what she would return to was not any single touch, but the quality underneath all of them. The understanding that moved his hands. He was not demonstrating a technique or performing competence or trying to get something right. He was paying attention. And the attention was the thing, the whole thing, the thing that had been missing from every touch she'd received in years before this, the thing she hadn't known she was starved for until she had it. He was learning her like a language. And she was learning him right back. And the learning was the most intimate thing she had done in years. Chapter 7. Further than the rules. Session 11 was a Thursday, late October, and the light was going earlier now. By the time the session began at 3, the afternoon had already started its retreat, the courtyard below going from gold to amber in the first hour, and then to the particular blue-gray of a Swiss autumn evening by the second. They had been in the room for an hour. She had been lying back against the pillowed end of the daybed, and he had been beside her, and they had been talking, and that was accurate. The talking was real, but it had been threaded through with touch the way all their sessions were now, a hand at her temple, her fingers at the inside of his wrist, his palm at the base of her spine, steady and patient. The talking and the touching had become a single thing, a form of communication that didn't require either one at the expense of the other. She had been teaching him about the collarbone, the curve of it where it angled toward the shoulder, the shallow hollow just above it. The lightest touch here, she said, produces sensation that moves inward and downward. Like a stone dropped in still water, the contact point is not where the effect lives. It radiates. The whole chest responds. She demonstrated on her own collarbone and then guided his fingertip to the place. He learned it within minutes. She could see him learning it, not intellectually but physically, his finger adjusting pressure and pace until she felt the radiating sensation begin. He had become extraordinary at this. Not because he was naturally talented with touch, though she believed he was, but because he approached every session the way he approached everything, as a genuine inquiry. He was not trying to get it right. He was trying to understand. And then he went still. The particular stillness that preceded something, she knew it by now, had learned to read it the way she'd learned to read his other signals. He was about to do something he had figured out on his own. His fingertip moved. Not along the collarbone, away from it, slightly lower, to a place at the softest upper edge of her sternum, the center of her chest, the place where the breastbone began. He did not press. He pressed nothing, moved nothing. He simply rested his hand there, the full warmth of his palm flat against that place, and was still. She stopped breathing. It was not a touch she had described. It was not in the curriculum. It was not anywhere in the language of the sessions. It was the exact right place. The place she had not known was a place until she felt his hand on it, and it was so precisely correct that for a moment she could not speak. "There," he asked. His voice was low and careful. He was reading her response. She understood. He had asked the question because he could already feel that he had found something, and he was confirming. "How did you?" she started. "The way your chest moves when I'm near that place versus other places," he said. "There's a difference. A very small one. I've been watching it for 3 sessions. 3 sessions." He had been watching for 3 sessions, measuring, attending, waiting until he was certain before he moved. "André," she said. "Too much." "No." She brought her own hand up and placed it over his, not to remove it, not to redirect it. To confirm it. To keep it exactly there. Not too much. Never too much. He watched her the way he always watched her, with that total, unself-conscious attention that she had stopped finding startling and had started to find necessary. She could feel his eyes on her face with the same quality as his hand on her chest. Present, attending, missing nothing. "You're scared," he said. "Not of you. I know. Of the other thing. The thing where this becomes something that lives outside this room." She looked at him. "Are you scared of that?" "Yes." He did not look away. He never looked away when it was important. "I have wanted things before and lost them because I didn't know how to hold them. Because I said the wrong thing at the wrong moment, or I didn't say anything and the silence meant something I didn't intend. Because I was too much and then too little and couldn't find the right amount in time." He swallowed once. "I don't want to do that with you. I'm more careful with you than I have been with anything." She felt something release in her so completely it was almost audible. "André," she said. "You're not losing me. You don't know that? I know it the way you know where to put your hands. Not because I was told. Because I've been paying attention." She looked at him steadily. "I've been paying attention to you since the 2nd session. And I know what I see." He held her gaze for a long moment. She could see something moving behind his eyes, not emotion suppressed, but emotion being considered, processed, understood, given its proper weight. Then his free hand came to her jaw. The way she had described, the way she had told him felt like being asked a question. He traced the line of it slowly, from the curve below her ear to the point of her chin, moving at the pace of something that could afford to take its time because it knew where it was going. She closed her eyes. She stopped managing. She simply felt the full weight of being known by a person who had taken knowing her seriously, who had treated her the way he treated every important thing, with patience and precision, and the willingness to go slowly enough to actually understand. "I have been trying to find the words," he said, very quietly. "Since the first time I touched you. I know. I think they're not words." His thumb, barely moving, traced the edge of her lower lip once, the most careful, most tentative question she had ever been asked. "I think it's this." She opened her eyes. He was very close. She could see the exact texture of his attention, the way his eyes held hers without effort or apology. "This is further than the rules of the room," she said. "Yes. I need to think. I need to talk to Dr. Voss." "I know." He did not move his hands. Did not pull back. Stayed, present and patient, where he was. "I'll wait." "I know you will." A pause. "That's the thing, André. I know you will, and I know you mean it, and I know it's not a performance." And that she stopped. "That's not something I've been able to say about anyone in a long time." Something crossed his face, not triumph, not satisfaction. Something much quieter. The expression of a person who has offered something real and watched it be received as real. "A week," she said. "Give me 1 week." "A week," he said. They spent the remaining time in the amber-glowing blue light doing something that was not on any curriculum and could not have been planned for, sitting beside each other close enough to feel the warmth between them, talking about his parents' apartment in Geneva and the view of the lake from their kitchen window. About the red bicycle in her courtyard and her theory that whoever left it was coming back, and her other theory that they had forgotten it entirely, and both possibilities were somehow equally beautiful. About the Congolese novel and what it had given her. The conversation of two people who have already said the important thing and are now simply being in each other's presence, which is its own kind of saying. When the session ended, he stood at the door for a moment. "Did you finish the book?" he asked. "Last night. At 4 a.m. He almost smiled. The muscles moved toward it. "How did it end?" "With someone choosing to stay," she said. "Even though it was harder than leaving. Even though staying required everything." He considered this for a moment. "Good ending," he said. "Yes," she said. "A very good ending." Chapter 8. Outside the room. Dr. Voss received the conversation the way she received everything, with complete attention and no visible judgment, her hands around a coffee cup in her office on the 2nd floor, the morning light coming through the window behind her. She had asked Ashley to come at 8, before the day began. Ashley understood this as consideration, as Dr. Voss making space for the conversation to be private. "Tell me what you've observed," Dr. Voss said. "Not, tell me what happened. Tell me what you've observed." The language of the practitioner, insisting on the perspective of the person who looks clearly rather than the person who is in the middle of the thing. Ashley told her. All of it, carefully, in the language she had trained in, because the language was useful precisely now, precisely in the situation it had been designed for. The development of countertransference over the course of 11 sessions. The specific nature of what had happened in each of the relevant sessions. The progression of physical practice and how it had changed in character. The moments she had recognized as significant deviations from standard practitioner posture, and the ways in which she had and had not managed them. And then, at the end of all the professional language, the part that could not be contained in it, I think he's the most real person I've encountered since I arrived here. And I think what's between us is real in the same way, not a product of the structure, not transference, not a function of the intimacy of the sessions. Something that would exist if we'd met somewhere else. Dr. Voss was quiet for a moment. She set her coffee cup down with the careful click of someone who is giving the silence its proper weight. Section 12, she said. I know. It requires that the client's therapeutic goals be substantially met before reclassification can be considered. It requires a structured transition period of no less than 3 sessions. It requires that neither party be in an active practitioner-client relationship at the time of reclassification. I know all of this. And you're telling me you believe those conditions can be met? Ashley had been prepared for this question. She had been preparing for it at 4 in the morning and on the walkover this morning and in the chair outside Dr. Voss's office for the 12 minutes before Dr. Voss arrived. She had not prepared an answer that would be convincing. She had prepared an answer that was honest. He came to me unable to be in a room with a woman without feeling like he was failing a test. He didn't have the rules to, she said. He is no longer unable. He knows how to communicate what he needs. He knows how to ask. He knows how to read a person, not as a skill he has practiced, but as an attention he's developed, real attention, the kind that sees rather than assumes. He knows how to be present with another person without disappearing into anxiety about the performance of it. He knows how to touch and be touched and say what the touch means. Those were his goals. Those goals have been met. And the partnership, Dr. Voss said. His long-term aspiration. That's not something I can give him in this room, Ashley said. That might be something we find out together. Outside of it. Dr. Voss was quiet for a longer moment. She picked up her coffee cup again and held it without drinking. I want to ask you something outside the protocol, she said. Personally. Okay. You came here recovering from something. A relationship that cost you. She looked at Ashley steadily. Are you certain you're recovering from it and not reaching for something to replace it? It was the question Ashley had asked herself at 4 in the morning. She had asked it without mercy and without the comfort of easy answers. Yes, she said. I'm certain. Because what I felt in that relationship was small. Managed. I was always making myself smaller to fit it. What I feel here is the opposite. I feel large. I feel like the full version of myself. He doesn't require me to be less than I am. He's the first person in years who has seen all of it and not backed away. Dr. Voss held her gaze for a moment. Then she set down the cup. 3 structured closure sessions, she said. And then we reassess. Ashley breathed out. Thank you, Marin. Don't thank me yet. But something in her face was warm, the specific warmth of a person who has built something and watched it work the way it was supposed to. How does he seem to you? In your honest assessment. Ashley thought about his hand on her sternum. The 3 sessions he'd spent watching before he moved. The way he'd said, I will wait, like it was a fact about himself rather than a promise, like waiting was not a sacrifice, but simply what he did with things that mattered. Like someone who has known what he wants for a long time, she said, and has been patient with the world's delay in catching up to him. She told him at the beginning of session 12. She had thought about whether to wait until the end, to conduct the session normally and tell him afterward. She had decided against it because she was not willing to perform a normal session with that knowledge between them, unacknowledged. She was done with performing normal around things that were not normal. She had learned what that cost. He listened the way he always listened. Without interrupting. With his full self present and receiving. When she finished explaining the timeline, what the 3 closure sessions would look like, what came after if both of them chose it, he was quiet for a moment. You talked to Dr. Voss, he said. Yes. Before I asked you to. Yes. A pause. That means you were already certain. Yes, she said. And met his eyes and held them. I was already certain. Something happened in his face. The muscles shifted, not to a smile, not yet, but toward one, moving in that direction with the same slowness he brought to everything important. Something deeper than a smile, more interior. The expression he made when a thing he had been patiently working to understand finally became clear, and he could rest in the understanding. 3 more sessions, he said. 3 more sessions. And then, she said, we find out who we are outside this room. Together. He was quiet for a long moment. She could see him assembling something, not words he could borrow from anywhere but words that were specifically his, specifically for this. I've known you since the 2nd week, he said finally. Tell me. You are someone who chose the hardest version of her own life, because it was the truest one, he said. You came to a country you'd never lived in, carrying debt and the aftermath of someone who tried to convince you that your truest self was your most shameful self. And instead of choosing something smaller and safer, you chose this work, this city, this life that requires you to be everything you are, all of it, without apology. You teach people that they are worth touching carefully. And you do it while you're still learning that lesson for yourself. That takes a kind of courage that most people talk about and don't have. He paused. She did not speak. That is who you are, he said. I have been trying to find the right words for 2 months. That is what I found. The afternoon light was in the room the way it always was, warm and specific. The courtyard was below. The city moved at its own pace, indifferent and beautiful. And Ashley Bennett, 23 years old, 5,000 miles from everything she had lost and closer than she had ever been to everything she wanted, let herself be seen. Completely. Without managing it. Without hedging it or qualifying it or making it smaller so it would be easier to receive. By a man who had learned how. Who had read the whole manual, who had come to every session early and brought something small and paid attention and waited. Who had decided in the first week, she understood this now, and had simply been patient with the protocol. She reached across and took his hand. Not as a practitioner. Not as an exercise. Just as herself, Ashley, who had said okay to a city that hadn't promised her anything and was beginning to understand what the city had been promising all along. He held it the way she had told him. Like something worth being careful with. Epilogue, after the room. The last session ended on a Tuesday in November, and the light outside was gone by 4:30. The courtyard was dark when they sat together for the few minutes after the transition period, Protocol Section 12, the formal close of what the room had been and the opening of what it was allowed to become. He told her about a restaurant in the Niederdorf district he had been wanting to try, a small place that served West African food adapted for Swiss ingredients, run by a Ghanaian woman who had been in Zürich for 20 years. He had found it in the way he found things, by paying attention to what he was looking for, and then not stopping until he found it. She told him she had been wanting to see the lake at dusk since her first week and had not done it yet. She had thought about doing it alone and kept not going, kept telling herself she would go when she had the time, until she understood that the reason she kept not going was that she didn't want to do it alone. That it was the kind of thing she wanted to do with someone. She had not had a someone. He said he hadn't been to the lake at dusk either, and both of them understood what they were arranging without either of them needing to say it in those terms. He stood at the door for the last time as her client. Ashley. André. Saturday, he said. One word. Everything in it. Saturday, she said. He nodded the small, contained nod that she had learned was a complete sentence. This nod meant, confirmed. Held. Looked forward to in the particular way that he looked forward to things, which was quietly and absolutely, and with his whole self already committed to it. She watched him go down the corridor. She listened to his footsteps until they reached the stairs and then disappeared into the building silence. Then she sat back down on the daybed for a moment, the last time she would be in this room in this way, and she wanted to feel that clearly rather than hurry past it. She pressed both hands flat against her sternum, the place he had found without being shown. The place she had not known was a place until his palm rested there, and she felt herself recognized in it. She breathed. She thought about Darius. About the bank statements and the late nights and the small systematic work of being told who she was allowed to be. About borrowing money from her mother for the flight while Darius slept in the next room. About submitting the application at 2:17 a.m. and the way it had felt, not like a decision made out of desperation, but like a decision made from the last solid floor she could find in herself, the deepest thing, the part of her that had not been reached. She thought about stepping through the doors of the Zürich Hauptbahnhof and saying okay to the city. About Dr. Voss's voice, your job is to meet them exactly where they are. About a man who had arrived with a folded piece of paper in his pocket because he was afraid of losing his words and who had turned out to have no shortage of them, just a need for the right conditions, for someone who would wait while he found them. About the book handed across a table without explanation. 3 cups of coffee arranged in a palm. The scar on the outside of his right hand, old and silvery, healed into a characteristic. The 3 sessions he had spent watching before he moved his hand to the right place. About I will wait, said like a fact about himself. About Saturday. She stood. She picked up her clipboard and her bag. She smoothed her jacket and looked at herself in the small mirror near the door that she had never once used during a session, and was using now as a way of returning to herself, of checking in with the person on the other side of all of this and asking, are you okay? Are you good? Are you all the way here? She looked at herself. She was 23 years old, and she had taken the longest road to get to this exact spot, the specific geography of this particular November afternoon in Zürich, and she was not going to waste a moment of what came next. She was going to be fully in it, every Saturday, every conversation, every slow and careful discovery. She was going to show up to it the way he showed up to everything, thoroughly, without rushing, with the willingness to pay attention until she understood. She turned off the light in the room. Outside, in the courtyard below, the red bicycle stood in the dark. It had been there since the day she arrived, which she had started to think of as a kind of constancy, a thing that stayed while everything around it changed. She had a theory now that whoever left it had not forgotten it or abandoned it. She had a theory that they had left it for someone specific, someone who would arrive when the time was right. She was going to learn to ride it this weekend. She was going to see the lake at dusk. She was going to do a great many things, and she was going to do them as the full and unmanaged version of herself, the one that had crossed an ocean to find the floor it had been standing on all along. She walked out into the corridor and down the stairs and out through the front door of the building on Langstrasse, into the November dark of the city that had made a decision and was simply living by it. She was ready to do the same. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more Hood Tales installments.